Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Larson. I'm one of the committee organizers. I'm out of Minneapolis, and I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker, Greg Crabtree. And Greg is a speaker, author, entrepreneur, financial expert, and I met him, or at least was introduced to him at a local business owner mentor group called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. And Greg spoke on business profitability, I believe, several years ago when I saw him. And like most of us that start businesses or agencies, we're passionate about design and development and programming, all this other stuff. And chances are it's not accounting. So I know I have a huge blind spot with accounting that, I've been struggling with since day one. And Greg's book, which I always get the title wrong, but Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits,
Right.
is the only text I found that makes sense, particularly for someone without a financial background. So Greg's topic today is about agency labor efficiency. So I think that's something that will apply to many of us. So with that, I'd like to hand the virtual mic over to Greg.
All right, good deal. Okay, so let's see, share screen. I want to share this one. Okay, and then start my presentation. Come on. There we go. All right, can you guys see the full screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the good news is the new book is almost here. It's at the printer. It is set for release on November 3rd. I think we're supposed to be up for taking pre-orders even on Amazon, soon to be up on our simplenumbers.me website. So I'm really proud. A lot of the concepts I'm going to cover today are a little bit out of the first book at the end, but some of the beginning is actually stuff out of the new book. And really, it's built around this idea of what are the things that we've learned in the last 10 years since I released the first book. And I chose the concept of rules for smart scaling as the subtitle because I'm all for scaling, but I've seen a lot of businesses grow with bad growth and things that aren't really profitable. And so what I'm going to really walk through here, in this hour that I have with you, is to really, talk about how to grow your business smartly. And realistically, I will tell you, grow your business to the point that you want to grow it to. You don't have to be $100 million business to be successful. You can have a $2 million business that's highly profitable and builds wealth, and that's just fine. Those are things that's not for me to decide. That's not for somebody else to decide. That's for you to decide. There are still some those natural things in business that are still true that I talked about in the first book of the black hole. The space between $1 million and $5 million in revenue, especially in your industry in the agency world, that's the black hole of business, because once you cross over that million, business becomes a lot more complex and harder to manage, and you're forced to spend money in advance of it being fully utilized to be able to grow the business in most cases. Some really good managers are able to scale that growth, stress their labor, and get through it. And I'll take you through an example of an agency that we helped grow from 600,000 in revenue to $1.5 million in a 3-year period using these concepts. Well, let's kind of get into it. And the first thing I start the next book on is really, this is kind of a reset of what I call the 3 simple rules for business success. Number 1, figure out what the market needs. Yeah, the market needs digital agencies. We're huge fans of outside agencies. We recommend to our clients all the time, even if you have an internal marketing staff, we believe that the creative talent that is outside of the business is necessary, because you run out of the internal person's ideas pretty quickly. And that person just has a limited view of the marketplace. And you guys, fulfill a critical need of being able to work across many businesses, see what works, test and repeat in that process. But being a digital agency providing, whether it's creative services or platforms or websites or whatever, that's not sufficient. What the market needs is as much about the way that you choose to interact with the market as it is the thing that you do or you sell to them. So once you figure out that need and that interaction, then the next question is, well, can I do it profitably? Well, Cro-Magnon accounting says, gee, I'm going to start a business. Gee, here's my cost. I'm going to sum up my cost. Oh, I need to make 10% profit. I'm going to take the sum of my cost and add 10% to it. And that's what I need to charge my customer for. It doesn't work that way. The problem is you'll never get to 10% profit. Two, we believe that the best means of profitability is to actually charge a market price for the thing that you do, deliver it in the most efficient manner that you can, and leave profit as the outcome. Now, granted, I got to be cognizant of my cost, but I can't overcharge the market. I might find one or two stupid customers that'll overpay me for stuff, but I can't scale a business based on stupid customers. There are plenty of them out there, but there's not enough of them. And so the idea is I got to figure out what is that median price and value that exists in the marketplace. And then I got to be able to charge to that. And then I've got to manage to that level of profitability. And so in this particular case, that's the number that we feel the most capable of helping our clients understand is take at whatever level that you're at, look at that, help people maybe do some research in terms of common pricing. We might suggest that they raise prices or they're charging too much, but let's get the cost and the revenues connected. But then what is the right amount of profit is really the biggest question that you got to ask last. In the first book, I hypothesized that at 5% profit, you're on life support. At 10% profit, you're a good business. 15%, you're a great business. And that actually does work for probably 70% of the businesses out there. But it's that 30% that bugged me. Then I'm going, I'm missing something here. So I set those levels based on observation, not on what is the number. Now I can tell you what is the number. And the number is I need a return on invested capital of 50%. So in your business as a digital agency, you may carry some accounts receivable. So that's an investment in the business. I have some business assets, but probably not a lot. We generally expense computers, so you're probably not hosting a server. Some of you might, but most people have gone to those just being pass-throughs at a server farm somewhere. You probably don't get much in the way of trade support from accounts payable to offset it. And you might get some what we call deferred revenue, where I bill the customer in advance and then I have to work it off. And so what you want to be able to do is I've got all of those things invested in the business, and then I've got my cash requirement that we want you to have 2 months of operating expenses in cash. So let's say that investment is $300,000 in total. Well, 50% return is $150,000. And so if you had $300,000 invested in your business for those things that operate the business, you might have extraneous stuff on your balance sheet that due from shareholder or intercompany loan with somebody else or something like that. Those don't count. Those are things that are extraneous to the operation of the business. If you have intangible assets, maybe where you bought somebody in a transaction, in an acquisition, you don't count those because it's the assets that are active in the business and what turns over. In most of your business cases, it's going to be equity. It's going to be total assets minus total liabilities. But it's not always equity, because you may have some of these other trashy items on your balance sheet, which is that sheet that you guys never look at in your financials anyway. And so once we figure out what that number is, if you got 300,000 invested, a 50% return is 50% of that number, 150,000. And so we would say if you have 300,000 invested in your business, your profit target is how can your business make 150,000 of profit? Now that's the minimum. What we can tell you from our experience in the agency business, you guys really should be closer to 75 to 100% return. Now, why is this important? Well, it's really has been a core issue that I've been trying to convince business owners like you guys to understand for years, is the fact that your business is the best asset and return on investment of anything you'll ever own if you run it correctly. I mean, just tell me, do you know where you can get a 75% CD? Do you know where you can get a 75% year-over-year return from a stock in the stock market? Can you buy a building that gets you 75% return year over year over year? And the answer is you can't. That's why so much wealth is created from the owning of a business. But here's the problem. As business owners, you kind of get ahead of yourself. You don't let the business get mature and fully capitalized. You don't challenge the business to get it to its optimal level of profitability. And that's what we're going to go through today, is going to help you understand those two things. If I get it capitalized and get it healthy, if I get it profitable and it's healthy, now I've got a really powerful investment that's better than anything I can put my money into. And so that's the argument that I want to win on. So what I'm going to show you is a little bit of an understanding, as Paul talked about, kind of how to understand your numbers. So at the end of the day, let's think about it like this. There's only three things that happen in business. You either do stuff, you sell stuff, or you make stuff. Now I'm going to use a combo model. Some of you do two things. You might sell things and do things. An IT managed service provider is an example. We do a lot of work in that agency, that arena. And so we use them as a good example of a combo, because an IT MSP is somebody who does services and some product sales in that process. And you guys have some similar characteristics if you're reselling something, into the customers that you're doing services for. So here's the four models. You got a manufacturer that's doing $4.4 million. This is the critical thing about the simple numbers P&L model. So you take revenue minus cost of goods sold. This is a pass-through. These are materials. And so when I talk to a manufacturer, my first question to them is, are you really a $4.4 million business? Because we all love to talk about revenue. I got news for you. As my good friend Alan Milt says, revenue is vanity. Profit is sanity. Cash is king. And so this $4.4 million of revenue is not real. It's $2.6 million of gross margin is what's real. These are all the pass-through costs of materials. These guys are not a $4.4 million business. They're a $2.6 million assembler of stuff. And now that $2.6 million that they have left over after their materials, their direct labor of $900,000 then creates value for working off of that $2.6 million. And leaves you $1.7 million to cover your management labor and your other operating expenses. This is about as simple of a P&L as you can get in that process. And so what's critical here is understanding, as we say, gross margin is the true economic top line of the business. Contribution margin is the most important number in your business, because this is the output of your business engine. If your business engine has no output, you have no business. If your business engine does not produce enough to cover your operating expenses, you have no business that's going to survive. And so that's why this dollar amount is so critical. Now we can look at it as a percentage, but let me ask you this. I mean, take a percentage down to your local grocery store and see if they take percentages to buy groceries. They don't. I don't care. The percentage is a secondary analytical measure to say why things are moving the way they are. I don't really care that this company has 59% gross margin percentage. I might watch it across time and see, is it going up or down, but I can have gross margin go down and still make a lot more money. We have a client right now that they did $16 million in revenue in medical supplies the last 2 years at about a 47% gross margin. They're going to do $80 million in medical supplies this year, but it's going to be at 33% margin with the same operating cost. Which business do you want to be? Well, I think I'm okay doing 80 million at a lower gross margin with the same operating cost, because it's not about the percentage, it's about the margin dollars that got created. Okay, so let's talk about the sales business. They're 40 million. This is a distributor model. 40 million of revenue, 34 million of goods they pass through. Are they a $40 million business? No, they're a $5,350,000 inventory manager is what they are. And they're only making 13% gross margin. So this is a really low percentage. Don't feel bad. They got the most profit of any of these three that we're looking at. So it's a profitable business, but this business has a special feature that we'll look at on another slide to drive it home. The services business, this is where you guys live mostly, is this services model. You might have a little bit of pass-through. So this is a pass-through to freelancers or other contractors that you're the billing face to the customer, but it's something that somebody else did for you, and you subcontracted it out to another company. So that's a pass-through. That number is not really targeted at a certain percentage, because you can sometimes pass through and sometimes not, based on management control. But look at the issue that you got here. You got a lot more labor involved for this $9 million of gross margin. And then the MSP is a little bit of both. It's, you've got some product margin, but it's mostly margin from labor services. Now, the next signature number that we have here is this DLER. So that stands for labor efficiency ratio. So this is the direct labor efficiency ratio of going for the manufacturer. They get $2.89 of gross margin for every dollar of direct labor. The sales business gets $4.86 of gross margin for every dollar of labor. The services business gets $2. And this is really kind of where a couple of things that we do know from looking at all the businesses that we look at in this structure is a services model is you guys in particular possess special skills, but it's real easy to fall into the trap. If you guys are only operating at a 2 LER, you're going to be at 10% or less profit, I can guarantee you. Because the problem that you're having is this is kind of a common labor pass-through level. Generally, what we've seen in services business, you need to be in the 2.5 to 3 range before you start to get to the 15 to 20% margin range, which we see in digital agencies. We believe that when the market is good, you need to be probably between 15 to 20% profitability. When the market is tough and constricted, you may drop down to 0. Hopefully you won't go below 0, but you got to have those 15 to 20% years to make up for the 1 in 5 years that either your customer focus, had some issues and dried up, or the marketplace had an issue and stopped spending temporarily, and that part dried up. For the MSP, you can see that they're a blend. Notice that their direct labor efficiency fits right between these two things. So they're partly sales and they're partly service. And so you can see their labor efficiency ratio is kind of a nice mix between the two. All of them are decently profitable. So let's look at the next one is management labor efficiency. So this MLER. So here I'm looking at management labor. So what is management labor relative to contribution margin? So this is really your power lever in business. And I'll show you this in the case study before we wrap up, in that if you get management labor efficiency right, by default, direct labor is going to be good. Management has 3 functions. You must drive revenue, you must control direct cost, you must control direct labor. And if you get those things right, then that's really, the business is going to be fine. And what we see a lot of times as you guys are trying to grow your business, you try to go hire a fully assembled human that is going to take care of all your problems. And I got news for you. We were talking to a mastermind group yesterday in Nashville, and those fully assembled humans don't exist very, very frequently. And the ones that look fully assembled cost you a lot and actually don't produce enough for what they cost you. And so that's this conundrum that you guys have to figure out. And if you do, I'm fine if you spend the money for that special person that's going to help you grow the business. You just got to understand how much that I've got to actually push the top line to justify that hire. And that's really kind of the key. I'll show you a technique of kind of how to come to that number and ask yourself, is there any way possible this person is going to help us be able to do this, or is this really kind of a fool's errand, in that process? So you can see management labor efficiency across these. Manufacturing is pretty good at 3.78, a little bit light on the sales business. I can tell you that this business actually was light because they eventually grew this number to over 4, because this business today is doing over 100 million instead of 40 million. The services business is at a 4, so that's not a bad number. Management, the MSP is at 369. So this is really kind of where I look at these and I always ask the crowd when I'm doing this in person. It says, well, which business would you rather be in? You got a manufacturing business at 15% profit, 3% profit for the sales business, 11% for services, 14% for MSP. If you were going to pick a business to be in, which one would it be and why? And since we're doing this virtual, it makes it a little difficult to do this. And so most people will generally gravitate to either the MSP or the manufacturer. Here's the thing that you got to understand. Notice we've added a second calculation here, as net operating income as a percentage to gross margin, not revenue. And this is an important measure because you start to see how the sales business starts to be equal to the manufacturing business when you look at profit as relevant to gross margin. And I would tell you, it's not a common measurement that outside people look at, but I'll tell you from inside the business, it's probably more accurate than a net income number, in that process. So you can see kind of the performance of these businesses, but you're still, if you're looking at, say, which one am I going to be in, the answer to the question is you don't have enough data. What's important about these businesses is sitting over on the balance sheet, which is that sheet that you guys don't look at, as I said before. Because what's important is there's three things that I mentioned earlier that's sitting on your balance sheet. Trade capital. So don't, think of working capital, but exclude cash and debt. Trade capital is accounts receivable. You guys don't have inventory, but you may have work in progress of projects that you're working on that you hadn't billed for yet. Subtract accounts payable. You don't get a lot of vendor support for what you do, so you don't have much there. You may have a little bit of accrued expenses, but this is the key for you guys to balance off the AR, is to bill in advance or get upfront deposits for what you do and get this trade capital number as low as possible. Your industry is pretty light on infrastructure capital. Most of your computers and everything are expensed pretty much as they're purchased. Most of you aren't running server farms anymore. So this is a really big advantage for you. And then the last one on the balance sheet's buffer capital. So this is your 2 months of operating expenses. So if we look back at the services business, your 2 months of operating expenses is this $4.7 million of direct labor plus the 3.6 of OpEx. You wouldn't count the cost of goods. And so, that you take that 4.7 plus 3.6 divided by 12, that's 1 month of OpEx. And then 2 months is about 1.3 million is what it turns out to be. The manufacturing business is the lightest one. So you got 900,000 here. So you got about $1.9 million. That number divided by 12 is about 100 and something thousand. So I think their number is like 320,000 is what their 2 months cash number is. But essentially, these three things, trade capital, infrastructure capital, buffer capital, this is everything on your balance sheet. It's just done in a different way. Now, then the last piece is, we call this launch capital, is the magic pixie dust of business. Launch capital is important to you guys because it's not only how you grow your own business, but it's also how you win your clients to use your services. So hold that thought, and we'll come back to launch capital in a moment. So now let's look at these same businesses. Here's your net income of each of them as a percentage to sales. But here's the balance sheet impact of each of these. The manufacturing business has AR, but they get AP that offsets their inventory. So their net number is 542,000, which is their AR. This number as a percent to sales is 12.3%. Okay, big deal. Why does that matter? Well, it does matter a lot because they're at 13% profit. Here's the big deal. If you go at $100,000 of new revenue, you're going to keep $13,300 in profit. So your cost, or the 100,000 minus the 13. But I've got to put $12,300 of that 13.3 back into an additional accounts receivable to grow it. And so this is the reason why that we say that this is a business that's poised for cash flow free growth. Every dollar of new revenue is producing 1% positive cash. The sales business, they get a lot of support from their vendors. These guys, when they launch their business, notice that their AP is higher than inventory, and then covers almost all of their AR, except for about 700,000. And that's the reason why this business is so good, because they went to their vendors and said, if you'll give me 75-day terms instead of 30, I can sell 10 times as much of your product. And they said, prove it to me. And they did. And so this is the reason why this business enjoys a great cash flow position. This services business, they get enough upfront deposits to lower their trade capital of 5%. If this $1 million went away, they would be at about 12% trade capital and 10% net income. So they would be negative 2% for all their growth. One of the reasons why we love the MSP model, which can be very close to the way your models work. If you bill in advance, you get some trade support, your trade capital can be close to zero. So that means 100% of your profit is flowing through in cash. So then you just need to focus on how do I stay profitable and I'll have positive cash flow. These are these other elements of capital. Here's your infrastructure, which is fixed assets minus the debt associated with it. Here's the cash balance that each of these businesses need to have. Now, notice the services business has the highest cash balance required because it's all labor. It's an all, I don't get terms on labor, but that's the number that it needs to be. So here's the final big takeaway. Based on these required capital levels to make this level of profit, the manufacturing business gets a 52% return. So anybody want a 52% CD? So as long as I can maintain this profitability, this cash flow structure and investment structure stays the same. Once I'm fully capitalized, it's like I'm investing $100,000 to get 52% return every year. Now that 52% is taxable, so I got to, give up, 30 something percent of that number in taxes. But that even the after-tax number is really good in that process. But look at the MSP over here that has almost zero net trade capital. This is the emerging business model that we see more and more frequently once people understand the power of this idea. Is they're at 120% return. Most of the MSPs that we're working with actually have closer to 150 to 200% return. That's a really good investment model. Now, you can't grow it super fast because it's one monthly recurring revenue client at a time, but it's worthy of the effort and it grows very nicely. So what we did is created this graph for people to understand. If I look at my profit, if my profit percentage is at 10% and my trade capital percentage is at 5%, well, I'm up here in the cash-free growth zone. The only thing holding you back for growth in that scenario is execution. You got to be good at marketing. You got to be good at telling your story. You got to go find the leads. But every new customer, you're cash flow positive on. But if I'm at 10% trade capital and 5% profit, then I'm burning cash to grow. And there's only, and if I burn cash to grow, I got to either fund it with debt, I got to come up with my own money to do it, or I got to be willing to put my time into it until it stabilizes and not get paid for my services. I kind of like this version up here. Now, you guys can live down here if you want to, but I kind of like living up here. And I have found that as we've educated our clients on this concept, they have magically been able to do two things. They bring their trade capital percentage down from here much lower, and they get more motivated to push their profit percentage up. And if you can do those two things, you're good, in terms of the business. So now let's talk about the magic pixie dust of business, launch capital, because this is important in two reasons. This is how you win your customers to get them to spend money for your services. We think marketing is one of the most powerful, cash business acceleration tools out there. So think of this: launch capital is a capital expenditure that lives on your P&L. And it lives on your P&L because just think about this. All of you have done this in the last 12 months. Think about anything that you've spent money on in the last 12 months that was intended to help your business grow, but the results of that spend is not known until the future. That's launch capital. I'm diminishing profit presently that was not needed to do the work that I'm currently doing to get to someplace else in the future. That's launch capital. Typically, marketing and labor are the two most common launch capital expenditures. You can need to add facilities. You can do tech dev. You can do software development to improve processes or whatever, or R&D. But most of the time, it's going to be marketing and labor. And what you're going to do is you're going to identify what that activity is, and that's your launch capital. You're going to establish an expectation of profit increase, not revenue increase, not margin increase, profit increase because of this catalytic spend. And, oh, by the way, to tie back into our 50% return scenario, we need a 50% return within 12 to 24 months. So how does that work? So this is a live client case study. So in 2012, picked up this client, Paul. This was actually an accelerator in a different part of the country. But they were doing $700,000 of revenue. So their goal was to increase their marketing spend. And so they went from 75,000 and added 121. So the sum of these two is what their planned spend was for 2013. So we took this increase and said, we've got to create a profit increase of at least 50% of this bet, this $121,000 bet that we're going to make. And we got to see profit increase by at least that number. And now there's other factors that we may be targeting profitability, but this is a minimum aspect of this catalytic spend. And so we a win is going to be getting to 124,000 in profit. Now these other costs are going to change, but all those other things that change are reactions to the catalyst itself. So I don't need to measure all those other things that move. I just need to measure the thing that was the catalyst in the choice process. So what happened? You can see they grew from 700,000 to 2 million. That's not the relevant point. Their profit went from 63,000 to 118. So their return on investment, they risked 121,000 to grow the business over what they were doing, and it increased profitability by 55,000. So that's a 45% return. So just 5% below our target of 50%. And we go, okay, that looks like it's working. Let's do it again. So this time their choice was we're going to add another 103 to it. So that added 103. We're going to spend 51. We need 51,000 increase in profit to get from 118 to 170. And this time they blew it out of the water. I mean, they got a 493% return. Now, granted, we're talking about something that's hard to measure. Granted, some of this activity that matured in 2014 was related to the marketing spend in 2013. I totally get that. But I still got to measure it across time and then use that measurement to interpret the results. This is not an exact science. It's a black art at best in that process. But still, we're looking at this, and this is looking great. And so they're at $628,000 in profit. And I go, says, well, that's pretty good. What are you going to do now? I says, well, if a little bit's good, a lot's better. Let's really light this puppy up, and let's add 394,000. And say, I mean, this, you figured it out. You found the holy grail of how to grow a business. Except you haven't found the holy grail because they got their head handed to them. Now, this is why I call marketing a black art. There's two ways to approach marketing. You can either take a leap to find the edge of the universe, or you can take one step at a time. Now, both are valid, but both have their consequences. In this case, they were taking steps here, and those steps were working just fine. They took a leap here, and they realized that two things. What had been working stopped to work as well. The volume of spend was too much for the market to absorb as well. And so they had to assess and says, well, the good news is we at least got our money back except $9,500, but we learned some stuff, and they kind of saw this as the year was progressing. And so they'd already started adapting some things, and they said, okay, we still believe in this. So in 2016, they still increased spend by 166, got a 91% return. They went back to the step process, and then 154 increase in 17 and got a 286% return. So in this particular case, this is a business. I mean, guys, just step back and think about this for a moment. This is a business that grew from 700,000 to 10 million in 5 years. They were profitable every step along the way, cash flow positive the whole way. This is a good example of direct labor efficiency management. We knew that they should be about a 682. With a problem back here, they were growing so fast that they were stretching their labor and needed to backfill, but they eventually got back to the 680 range of where direct labor needed to be. Here's really where their weakness was, is they were doing really good on management labor efficiency at a 4 right here, and even here they were at a 4. They got a little over, they spent too much money on management out here, and they didn't get the requisite return off of this management labor spend. And in the future, what they ended up doing was actually trimming management labor back to the appropriate amount to get back to their 15% plus profitability. But essentially, that never would have been an issue had they not found the catalyst to really launch the business in that process. So the takeaways, it's phenomenal. Grow from 700,000 to 10 million in 5 years, and they've stayed over 10 million. They knew they were able to identify the catalyst. In this case, it was marketing. They set their return on investment and they committed to it. And we monitored this with them on every call as we went through the process with them. They adapted when it's not always going to work. And so what are you going to do about it? And you guys in your industry, you know this very well. Not every marketing campaign works. Not every plan, turns out the way it is. So don't be afraid to adapt and keep going. And then they understood how to get back to that appropriate level of profitability of a minimum target of a 6 direct LER and then also a 4 management LER in that process. Okay. So now in the time remaining, let's go through one more case study. So this one is one that I've used many, many times. And Paul, you may have actually seen this when I did the presentation in Minnesota. So this is actually an agency client of ours that when I first started working with them, there were about $600,000 in revenue. This $37,000 in cost of goods sold are freelancers. So here's their gross margin number, $539,000. Direct labor, DLER is at 243. So they were at $23,000. Now, when I first met them, they were telling me that they were at 25% profit. And they said something interesting. Says, well, we're at 25% profit, but we're having some trouble with cash flow. That sounds funny. Let me look at your data. And when I looked at their data, what they had done is beginning this management labor number, which is the 2 owners, they were paying themselves through distributions. They weren't taking any wages. And so this 121 was part of their profit. So they were telling themselves that they had about 150,000 of profit. No, you got 23,000 of profit. And this was 2 of them split 50-50. So it was making about 60 grand a piece, which is not great. And I said, okay, so your real agency profit is 3.99%, not 25. So how do we fix it? So I said, all right, guys, well, here's the way we do it. So the first thing is we're going to keep your wages at roughly the same number. So 123,800. So they're splitting about 61.5 a piece, roughly. So this management LER becomes the beginning point of this discussion. So I can tell you that for probably an under $5 million agency, I need this to be between a 3.5 to a 4. But 3.5 is probably kind of the minimum where we want to be. So I'm going to take the 123 times 3.5. Step one is I need to calculate, well, how much contribution margin do I need to produce? Well, step one is these 2 numbers times each other is 433,000. So I have to ask the question, all right, so can you guys find a way to produce 433 instead of 317? Well, we think we can. How much is that in gross margin? Good question. So the next step of the process is, now this comes from us working with agencies. As I said, we know from the agencies we've worked with, we strive for minimum 250, but I really want this number to be a 3. If you want to be a top performing agency, I really would like this direct labor efficiency to be a 3 in that process. I might can live with 275, but if I start doing that, I got to probably get a 4 down here to compensate for it. But let's say that this is a 3. So this is the hardest math I'm going to ask you to do. So we're going to take contribution margin of 433,000 divided by, do the operation in the parentheses first, go back to Algebra 101, and I'm going to take direct LER of a 3 minus 1, which is 2. And so that number is 433 divided by 3 minus 1 is 216,000. So what that does, it says at a 3 LER to produce this amount of contribution margin, I need $216,000 of direct labor. It's not as hard a math as you think, so just work through it. So then, well, what does gross margin need to be? Well, that's pretty simple. It's 216 plus 433. I'm just doing the math straight up. And so that's 649,000. So now I can ask them the complete question. All right, essentially the direct labor number came out exactly within spitting distance of what they were spending. And I said, here's the question I need to ask you. Can your current team produce 649,000 of gross margin instead of 539? 110,000 divided by 12 is about 9 grand more a month. Oh yeah, we can do that. Good. Let's try that. So what did they do? Well, they beat it by 10 grand. They got 658, and they spent almost within $3,000 of the direct labor number we expected. Now all of a sudden this goes to 308 direct LER, and look what happens here. Magic. Do you remember me? Let's go back. Did I project what other operating expenses were? No, I didn't need to. They're going to be what they're going to be. That's not your problem. Your problem is purely, I got to get the revenue and I got get my labor to produce relative to that gross margin in an appropriate fashion. And if I get those things right, the costs take care of themselves. And so in this case, they go from 3.9% profitability to 19, and a real $134,000 in profit instead of 23. I said, good job. You need a raise. So now that you prove that you can do what you say that you think you can do, we're going to give you a raise to 207,000, so about 103,000 apiece. But the same ratios apply. 350 direct LER, $3, 350 management LER, $3 direct LER. So that creates, whoa, that kind of popped up there, didn't it? So instead of a $100,000 increase, it's more like a $400,000 increase. So this is, and so when you quantify things, this is kind of where the math kind of slaps you in the face and go, okay, can I do that? And this is going to test whether or not you believe you can or not. And they said, yeah, we can do that. I says, okay, well, let's see what you do. Now, granted, I'm not asking them to do $1 million for the same amount of labor. We've given them a, $150,000 additional budget for additional, labor resources. They're getting paid more. So this looks pretty good. So did they hit it? No, they missed it. They got within 40,000 from a revenue standpoint, but notice what happened here. Freelancers shot from 33 to 81 because the work came at them too fast. Look at this. I gave them a budget of 362,000 for direct labor, but they only spent 271. Why is that? I mean, why are you doing that? Well, here's the deal, and all of you have experienced this. When you think about needing a new person, do they show up tomorrow? No. You can't even get an interview by tomorrow. It takes months. And what you need to do, and what they've done ever since, is they're always leave open positions trolling for talent. You, in this marketplace, and especially right now, there's a little bit of a window of good talent available in the industry. It's not going to be there 6 months from now. So if you need a talent upgrade, now's a great time to do it, because you're going to see these people there, for a little while. But they waited too late before they hired somebody, so the only resort that they had was to go and backfill with freelancers. But everything else worked. So still, so they got to a 352 direct LER. But here, whenever we set the target at a 3 and you perform through a 352, we always ask the question, is that sustainable? And they admitted they were burning their people out. They did not have enough labor. I said, okay, so you got to get busy hiring, but good job. Oh, by the way, you made 22% profit. So yeah, you worked your tail off for a year, but you made $233,000 in real profit in that year. So good job, you need a raise. So we bumped them to 254, so 125 apiece. 350 direct 350 management LER, 3 direct. That number doesn't change. So now their new target's $1,334,000. I said, all right, guys, now what are we going to do about this? Okay, we're going to start hiring and make sure that we hit this labor spend target. Great. All right, now you got to make sure you go fill up the pipeline. So get busy selling. And they hit it. They hit it spot on. Now look at how they hit it. They oversold it, which is not uncommon. It's okay. If you oversell it, you're just going to backfill and cover it with the freelancers. Management, direct labor. They had a $444,000 budget. They actually only spent $410 because they covered some of it with the freelancers. But that's okay. It's a 326 LER, so it came down. It's a little closer to what the target was. This 26 cents, though, is actually the margin that we're getting off of the freelancers. We don't make as much off of the freelancers as a pass-through, but we're making a little bit for handling it. And so really their team was working. If we isolated the margin to what the employees produced, it was really close to the 3 direct LER. Now look at this, 337,000 of profit. So in this particular case, this business went from 600,000 in revenue, 3 years grew to $1.5 million. So it didn't grow to 10 million, but that's okay. But look at this, a business that was struggling to be profitable and paying really wimpy salaries. They got an increase in salary every year along the way, because we want truth in profitability too. I'm a big fan of don't hold your salary down and try to take it out in distributions to avoid taxes. That's a fool's game. You want to pay yourself. You will psychologically commit to a market wage and defend it long before you'll defend profitability. And so we're batting 1,000. Anybody we've convinced to go ahead and push their salary to a true market wage. Now you got to go earn it. You got to get to perform the services to justify that wage. But these guys did. Every year they got better, and every year their wages went up, in that process. But they, this business that was back here making almost nothing made close to $700,000 in pure profit. That was almost all free cash flow, in the next 3 years. I think that's a pretty good success story. And that's really what every one of you are capable of doing, because you all do things that the market needs. Now, the market's a little fractured at the moment, but we're seeing people really get geared up and ready to start spending money on marketing. So all of our marketing clients, yeah, they were a little light over the summer, but they didn't go to zero. And certainly the PPP pretty much filled any hole that they had drop in business. So now they're still economically really ready to go, and take advantage of this. So essentially, LER takeaways from running a digital shop: hold your current team accountable to gross margin production. Whatever you choose to spend in labor, just back into what is that gross margin target that they got to go produce. And you probably should produce it monthly. So give them a monthly target of saying, this is what's important. Any increases in management labor, just reset your new target to justify those increases. And then, always just keep trolling for new talent. I mean, that's really kind of the key is, you gotta work for looking for that talent. And if you've got an underperformer, now's a great time to actually, find that person and upgrade your team. And then understand also, be careful of, there's times to use freelancers and times to use permanent staff. My rule of thumb is any time that I can keep an employee more than 50% utilized throughout the year, I'm okay. I make more money with that person as my employee than a freelancer. And so some of you overdo the freelance and are afraid to hire employees. Some of you overdo the employees and should use some freelance. And I think that's really groups like this. You guys can really, kind of trade off ideas of how to manage both groups of people, because we see the folks that learn to manage both groups being the ones that are the most profitable and most successful. So with that, I know we got a couple of minutes left. So Paul, any questions or thoughts from the group?
And those that are on chat, feel free to just chat something or get my attention. One just reaction I have is, for me, accounting is often this report card you get at the end of a year, and sometimes it's a good report card, sometimes it's a bad. But with the LER, just to think in terms of like, here's what the numbers are, here's what we want them to be, what marketing do we need to do, and what services do we need to provide to get to that number. That's just like a totally different way of thinking about it. That, like, again, it's kind of like the book. It's just a different perspective for accounting, which for me, like I said, it's always something I look at when it's probably too late. And you're suggesting kind of using it to plan ahead.
Oh, what just happened to Greg?
Ooh, did we lose? Did he move to the session, or I
don't think so. I think an accident happened there. Let's see if he'll jump back in.
All right. The answer is refresh the browser.
There we go. Sorry about that, Greg. That's actually my fault. I apologize.
No worries. Yeah, we figured it out.
Hey, I've got a question for you. I got to ask. I really love the talk. Thank you. you talking about how at the very end, you're talking about how owners handling distribution payments.
Right.
Being an S corp, we obviously have that kind of same system, and the percentages we do have changed over the years. Can you kind of expand on how taking the distributions for the tax benefits is a foolish thing to do? And I'm guessing there's probably a percentage balance there that you probably recommend. Could you just expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think most people are concerned about the heavy load of Social Security tax. So you pay 15.3% company and employee, combined up to about 140,000 a comp. But what we found is, and this is where the math will play out otherwise, but the psychology beats the math. Is every client that we've gotten to increase their wage to a market wage that they would pay somebody for doing the job they do without being an owner, and then you live off of that number, as I said in the talk, you will more emotionally defend getting your paycheck every 2 weeks than you will defending profit. And I'm living proof of that. We merged with a firm back in January, so we went from 40 people to 2,000. Now, I will tell you that my first experience from having merged is that I underperformed for the last 30 years I had my own firm, because I performed better being accountable to the managing partner, who is still yet to tell me to do anything. He left it to me, but I'm a competitive person, and I have been far more productive and been willing to address things that I just didn't want to deal with, and I accepted lower profitability because I just didn't want to deal with it. And so what I look for are these psychological cues that gets people to achieve their best potential. And I think paying yourself a market wage keeps you from doing mental Olympics on your P&L every month of what truth is. And then it also creates a secondary clean picture that says anytime the business makes a profit, you just got to set aside the taxes first from that. And then you get to decide what is the best use of that remaining profit. Do I reinvest it back in the business? Now, here's the thing that I think is huge. The reason why I gave you that return on invested capital number is, if your business is producing 50 to 100% return, why wouldn't you reinvest in it first until it can accept no new investment? And there's a point that you can't throw more money at it to make it better. You got to go execute. And I will tell you that the vast majority of businesses can barely deploy 20% of profit back into the business each year to grow it, just from an executional standpoint. So cash, and my point in all of this is, cash is not your impediment to growth. It is strategy and execution.
Excellent.
If you get those things right, you guys fit in this nice model of, you got a very low load of cash flow negativity. You really should be able to grow cash flow free. So it's about define your market, get your strategy right, go get those customers. And I'll tell you, I mean, that launch capital thing that I'm showing you guys, that's the way to sell your services to your customers. Get them to understand, if we are good at what we do in digital services, you're going to increase profit, not revenue. You're going to increase profit because of what we brought to you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. We don't have a ton of time, but I do want, if you could answer this a little quickly. I think it's a great question. Josh, that's on the committee, asked, what do you recommend on billing larger projects websites? We currently do monthly progress billing.
Yeah, so monthly is good. So a lot of it is remember, make it easy for the customer. What does the customer understand? So where I've seen agencies get in trouble is they want to bill on a fixed price basis, and they make one of two errors. You do way too much work in the beginning and your payments are coming too late, or you bill too much at the beginning and don't get around to working on it until late. And you've got to just make sure that the planning and the cash flow. So we think the best businesses in the world operate pretty close to your cost of operation to your payment from your customer, or in very short windows of time.
That's awesome. Thank you, Greg, so much. Yep. Paul, do you have anything else for Greg?
I don't. Greg, you will be at the business roundtable, which I guess is a couple hours. I don't want to get the time zone wrong. So I'm sure there'll be some spillover questions there.
All right.
So
looking forward to it. All right. Good deal.
Yep.
All right. You guys have a great time.
Awesome.
See you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.